Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of the Pangolin Podcast. I'm your host, Toby Jermyn. Thank you very much for joining me. In each episode, I've invited a professional wildlife photographer to imagine themselves in a remote location. And along with their camera gear, they're allowed to bring 5 photographs to hang on the wall of their humble dwelling. Now, 4 of these must be their own, and the final image is one they admire by another photographer. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the images as we talk, but for audio listeners on other platforms, there is a link in the description to a gallery. On today's show,
I was actually in the Kruger National Park with a 500mm prime, and I had lions hunting zebra straight towards my car. So with a 500mm prime, there's no changing the focal length at all. So the lions started running, and they ran straight to my car. The lion was on the back of a zebra, maybe 10 meters from my car, and I had 0 images from that trip.
My guest today is a South African wildlife and landscape photographer based in Hoedspruit, best known for his powerful images of African wildlife and dramatic natural scenes. With nearly 2 decades behind the camera, he combines a deep love of the wilderness with a strong emphasis on teaching, helping photographers around the world to capture and edit stronger images through his YouTube channel, online courses, and guided photo safaris. His work has been widely published, earning recognition in major photographic competitions, and includes the cover image for the 2023 coffee table book, Remembering Leopards. Welcome to the show, Mark Dumbleton.
Thanks very much for having me. I really enjoyed the intro, and I must just say the Remembering Leopards cover is one of my greatest achievements. It's very close to my heart. Living in Hoedspruit, we basically live amongst leopards, so that was just the cherry on the top for my career, so to speak.
It's a stunning series as well. We had Margot, who produces the series, on the show before, and really, really worthwhile. And the competition for the cover is pretty fierce, isn't it?
Yeah. When she told me I got the cover, I didn't know what to say. It was very emotional, and just being part of that project just means a lot to me. And to actually get the cover with, ironically, my favorite animal, it was just it was amazing.
So last time I saw you, I think it was a couple of months ago, I was in Hoedspruit, and we had that event where we got everybody together. You did mention then that you were going to try and get out and get to the bush to go and do some photography. Did that manage to come to fruition?
Luckily, living in Hoedspruit, it's a 45-minute drive to the Kruger National Park. So I have been for a couple of day visits, but I did have one dedicated trip to film an in-the-field video for my YouTube channel. People really connect with sort of in-the-field instruction. So, it's one thing sort of spending time in the studio explaining photography, but it's another thing actually being in the field, looking at a lion live and actually talking about the camera settings and that sort of thing. So I did get a few nice images from that trip, and mainly I've been in the studio since we last spoke.
Excellent. Now, the premise of this, obviously, was we asked you to go back into your archives and choose 4 images. As I mentioned at the top of the show, you've been doing this for about 20 years. So you can only imagine you must have terabytes of images. Were there 1 or 2 that came to mind, or was it more of a tricky process?
To be honest, they almost immediately sprung to my mind. And ironically, the first image that we'll show you shortly is probably one of my oldest photographs. And it took me about 5 years to realize the merit in that image. But I think I would say 3 of them came to mind very quickly, but there were other images that I had to sort of, exclude in the series of images that we're going to show. So for almost 20 years, taking photographs multiple times per year, it does become quite hard to choose a batch of just 4 images.
Okay, well, tell you what, let's start with the first image, shall we? Tell us about this image.
So this is an image of a lioness covered in blood with one of her cubs standing basically just underneath her. She's also got a tooth missing, and the image is really, really old. It's from 2008. I didn't see the potential in this image for at least 5 years, and I remember the day that I actually found this image in my very badly organized Lightroom catalog. And immediately when I saw this image, a huge story jumped out at me. And I think with my photography, I try and portray a story through the image. Now, obviously, that's quite difficult to do with just a 2-dimensional image. But this image, for example, it's a mother covered in blood from a giraffe kill, and the cub just came to sit by the lioness. And ironically, this was taken in the middle of summer. So The bush was very green. It was very thick. And I spent probably 3 or 4 hours with these lions. Ironically, again, for Kruger, I was there by myself for maybe an hour, which was unbelievable. The actual story behind this image is very simple. The lioness was just feeding on a giraffe and the cub just sat by her. But this image actually went quite viral at one stage on Instagram. And there was quite a big blog that shared this image. And they made up this fantasy story. They said the lioness killed another lion protecting her cub and lost her tooth in the process. Now, that for me is obviously, it's not true, but that's the power of photography. You can actually interpret an image, and if you can make up your own story and something that jumps out at you that dramatically, for me, that's the success of a wildlife photograph.
And so, had you seen this lion before? I mean, that's one of the first things I noticed. I had to look really carefully, and I went, "Oh, okay, no, she's missing a canine," which is, number one, probably extremely painful, and number two, quite debilitating for a lion as well, to lose one of your primary weapons. Do you know, this didn't happen now with the giraffe, did it? It's not a recent injury. Does it look like an older injury?
Well, I've had many people ask me, what happened to the lion? Why is a tooth missing? And the truth is, I don't know. And I think that almost for me is part of the appeal in this image. I don't know if she lost it in the kill. I got to the kill maybe half an hour after they'd killed a giraffe. And what's amazing, there was only 2 lionesses there. There was no males. There was no big pride. So they had taken that giraffe down. There was a slight embankment close to where they were sitting. So they might have chased it down the embankment and killed it that way. I'm not sure. But the amounts of messages I've got from people asking what happened to the tooth, why, that sort of thing, I really don't know.
Did you find the tooth? Where was the tooth? Was the tooth embedded in the giraffe? What was going on? But it's quite interesting, isn't it? Well, no, but that in itself lends itself to the story. Here we have the most heroic lioness who, with her maybe sister, has taken down a fully grown giraffe. No wonder she loses teeth when she's doing that sort of thing. I mean, it's the ambition. You got to pay the price, haven't you?
Absolutely. I mean, when I found these lionesses with this giraffe, I was like absolutely amazed. And people look at this and there's many questions to ask and they spend a longer time looking at it. And I think that's why the image was so successful and shared all over the internet. And ironically also, this is my most purchased print, strangely enough.
Really?
I get a lot of mothers asking me for this print because to them it represents the power of motherhood and that type of thing. So it's not something I would necessarily hang on my wall as a pretty image, but for me as a memory when I first started my career, I was by myself sitting with these lions and it was just an incredible thing to witness.
I think that's extraordinary, actually, because I often talk about that when we talk about printing images. And often the images that get printed are big black and white images, maybe a landscape or something with a bit of motion blur in it, which makes it look more like painted or artistic. And I always say, nobody ever hangs a picture of a snarling leopard on their wall. But it turns out they do, or similar. You know what I mean? It's not your conventional piece of art. But again, it's the story behind it. It's the power of motherhood with a baby, which has that sort of meaning as well. Extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you took this image in 2008, but you only went back to edit it 5 years ago. Is this something you find yourself doing more often, is going back into the archives and finding older images and using newer editing techniques that you might not have had previously to look at these images?
Definitely. I would say it's a lot to do with the software and the techniques, but it's also a lot to do with sort of my understanding of what I'm trying to achieve and also the way that colors work in an image, how lightness and darkness works in an image. This lion image, for example, the background was like neon green. It was the middle of summer. And when I'd first processed this image, it was very bright. It almost felt too happy. And I think through sort of my understanding of how to bring forward more of a mood in an image, I realized, okay, the image is too bright. The green in the background doesn't work. And through that sort of knowledge, I then decreased the exposure quite a bit, brought down the saturation on the green. And I think it just helps emphasize the story that I'm trying to go for. You know, this is not a happy scene. The lion's just killed something. So through the colors and through the editing, that's what I tried to achieve here. But to answer your question, I think the more I teach people how to edit, the more I understand editing myself because I've got to try explain it to people. And I think this example here in this image definitely needed a change in the mood to what I had originally done with the first edit. So just understanding how contrast and how light and how darkness and how colors work together, I think that is really the biggest contributing factor to my change as a wildlife photographer when it comes to editing.
Well, I think that's an important lesson, isn't it? Because we all evolve, our photographic techniques and styles change, but that also could be applied to editing. What you thought was a good edit before might be completely different now because you have a different take on things. You change as a human being. You become older, wiser, hopefully, and your attitude or your view on the world changes as well. So would you say that your styles changed over the years from editing and photography?
I would definitely say it's changed. When I first started photography, I would edit things, lots of contrast, lots of color. And I think as you mature as a photographer, you start learning the more subtle approach is better. I don't really edit strong contrast images. They're more dialed back. The shadows might be softer. I try to bring a bit more mood in a darker way to my images. And I just feel like it represents the struggle for life and death in the African bush. Like I've got a very keen understanding of how wildlife works. I mean, the first time I went to the bush, I was 6 weeks old. So I've been very fortunate to live close to these wildlife areas for my whole life. And I think through that understanding, I've tried to sort of portray that struggle. It sounds very maybe cheesy in a way, but that struggle through my images and through the use of color and drama and desaturation and all that type of stuff.
I think it's very interesting, actually. I think we got to the point where the cameras were taking such good photographs that they were almost too perfect. So they looked almost unreal. And now people deliberately leave the grain in some images and let's see, make it feel less artificial, I suppose is the word I'm looking for. So there's a lesson to be learned. The next lesson we must learn is never throw away any images, just buy more hard drive space, because the chances are you're going to go back into your archives and find something and redo the edit. So there we go. Those are the lessons we're going to learn from that. Awesome. Thank you very much for your first image. Let's move on to your second image, please.
This is an image of a mother elephant and a baby elephant. You can see a bit of a theme going here between the first and the second image, underneath a very dramatic, dark, stormy sky. This was taken in Masai Mara, and I was actually hanging a camera from a monopod to try get it as low as possible with a cable release. So I pre-focused to roughly where the elephants would be, used a very narrow aperture to get as much depth of field as possible, and I just had good time shooting hundreds of images. And this one, I really liked it. The elephant's framed near the bottom of the frame. I like the big dramatic sky in the background, and the way they're facing in opposite directions. So you could almost sense a bit of, isolation in this. They're not sure where to go. I guess everyone's going to interpret the image differently, but I think for me, that small observation in their body positioning helped tell a bit of a story in this image. And, this one, the raw file was fairly flat. So I have added a bit of contrast to the background because the image is of the mother and her baby, but it's also about the environment they're in. And I think with wildlife photographs, simplicity goes a long way. If there was hundreds of elephants here, this image might not have worked. If there were trees, if there was a patch of sky with blue sky, that might not have worked. For me, that dark dramatic sky in the background is something I really enjoy. I'm one of those types of people that when it rains, it makes me happy.
I think that's exactly it. This photograph would be completely and utterly different if that was just a blue sky, even with a couple of clouds in it. Because like you say, it's the isolation. Elephants are massive animals, and yet you've made them very small in the frame, giving so much more space to these massive clouds. And there is nothing more dramatic. For those of you who haven't been to Africa yet, who bemoan some rain where you live at, we love it. We love it when rain comes because you have these ginormous buildups and shafts of light coming through. It's an amazing photographic opportunity. You mentioned, obviously, you were editing this as well. There's a very fine balance between the very dark sky and the very light foreground and the light on the elephants as well. Was that difficult to capture?
No, I think there was a bit of natural light on the foreground. I have darkened down the very immediate foreground slightly. I just find a very bright patch at the bottom of the image quite distracting. So people who've watched my YouTube and the editing I do, I darken down a lot of the foreground. That just helps the viewer's eye move from the bottom of the image into the scene. And I think the top of the image and maybe the left and the right-hand side has been darkened down slightly, just basically creating a bit more of a vignette, just to drive home that isolated sort of feeling on the image here.
You're quite right. It makes you look into the image at the subject. You do a lot of editing content, I would say, probably more so than most wildlife photographers on their channel, and you're known for it. And for those of you who would like to learn about Mark's techniques, he has a very good Lightroom course, which is specifically for wildlife photographers. So we'll leave a link in the description down below. So talking about editing, it's a bit of a double-edged sword because it's becoming so advanced now that you can almost rescue any image. And we get people, especially in photographic competition, saying it's not fair, it's not photography, people are just really good at editing. What do you have to say to those people?
I would say, if you're talking from a competition standpoint, there is a bit to say about how far you can take editing. Photography for me is an expression of myself. I'm a very creative person and I like to edit my images. I don't like to fake anything. I might add a little bit of brightening to create a slight lightning effect on an image, but I don't like to produce something that wasn't true or real at the time. I think if you are going to share an image that you've manipulated in a massive way, I do think it's fair to tell people, I have replaced the sky, I have done X, Y, Z. But I think the perception of the public now, unfortunately, is everything is photoshopped. Everything is thrown through an AI software. That's unfortunate. And I understand why people have built that perception. And I guess maybe through my YouTube channel and also the in the field videos, like if I take an amazing photograph, people actually see me taking that image. They're 100% real. All these images, nothing was taken away, nothing was added. The colors were maybe manipulated and contrast added. But, those are the tools that we have nowadays, and we should use them, because if no one edited images and we all posted our raw files, it would be very hard to stand out from a very saturated crowd. And, through editing, you're able to, like I say, express yourself using various different techniques.
And try all sorts of different things. I've just bought myself, I'm going away and doing some street photography now. So I've just bought myself a little Fuji X106, which I'm going to use rather than my phone. And I'm having so much fun with the recipes. I don't know if you know about these, but Fuji's quite famous. They're recipes. You can create film recipes to actually make your images look like 30, 40 years old, just as you shoot them straight from camera. So I'm having great fun playing around with that sort of thing. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. Use the tools that you have available to you. I think you're quite right in adding and removing things and passing them off as being authentic is not great. But I have many visions. I'm hoping that AI soon, I'll be able to take my memory card straight out of my camera, slap it into the computer and just say, please, can you edit the best of these for me? And maybe put them to music or something, because when you're out there and you're taking thousands and thousands of photographs in a day, it can really stack up, can't it?
Yeah, especially when you're out in the field and you're taking 10 or 20,000 images over a few days. It would be nice for AI to sort that all out, delete all the rubbish. I mean, Lightroom's coming out with an AI culling tool now, but I mean, I can't trust that. It's, you never know what it's going to do.
I looked at that. Actually, I was at a photographic show and they have those sorts of tools for wedding photographers where I think they delete anything which is a little bit soft or out of focus or something, which is never going to work for wildlife photography, because you might have used some deliberate motion blur and it's going to get canned, auto-deleted by the system. Maybe what you can do is you can train it. You can take an archive of your favorite 1,000 images that you've edited, so it learns your style, and then it can go and cull. There we go.
I'm sure down the line there's going to be software where you input a photo that you like and like a style, and then you put your raw file in, and the AI is going to edit it to that exact same style. So I guess, it's going to take away the creative side, I should say, from photographers. And also, it's nice to learn about different techniques and that sort of thing. But yeah, who knows where AI is going to go?
Who knows? That's a whole other subject. Maybe we'll do a YouTube video together one day and discuss it. It'll be a 3-hour video, I'm sure. Okay, and when you're editing, how long would you spend on an image? I mean, you've got 10,000 images you've just taken. How long before you go, okay, I'm not doing anymore? Do you draw the line somewhere?
I think I do. When I'm editing, sometimes I can edit an image in a couple of minutes, sometimes maybe 10 minutes if there's something tricky like a specific mask or that sort of thing. But I do find now and then I go completely over the top if I'm trying to be a bit creative or trying to mess around. So in Lightroom, I actually use the snapshots feature quite a bit. So I'll go through and edit, I'll create a snapshot if I quite like the results, and then I'll carry on. And often when I think I'm done with an image, I'll go back to a snapshot, maybe one or two before sort of the final state of where I thought an edit would be finished, and actually prefer something I had done earlier. And that sort of ties in with what I said earlier about my approach has become a bit more subtle. But to answer your question, in terms of how long, it could be anywhere from a couple of minutes to maybe 20 minutes. Very rarely does an image take longer than that. Maybe if I'm editing an old image and there's thousands of dust spots, it might take a while.
There we go. So the lesson today is sometimes less is more. That's brilliant. Do you have a favorite Lightroom tool or less known trick that people might not know about? Is there something new that's come out recently?
The first thing that sprung to mind as you asked me that question, it's nothing new, but it's a trick where I use a warmer white balance to warm up the image. And then with color grading, I add blue to the shadows to counteract that warmth in the shadows. And what that does, it can create a nice sort of color contrast to your image. Even if you don't warm up the image, if you add a little subtle blue to the shadows, it really helps create some really nice color contrast in the image.
Well, there we go. Top tip. Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, on that note, we're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to discuss the last two images that Mark chose for the show. So we'll see you in a second. Welcome back to the second part of the Pangolin Podcast with me, Toby Jermyn, and my guest today, wildlife photographer Mark Dumbleton. So, Mark, this is your third image. Do you want to tell the viewers and listeners what's going on here?
So this is an image of two buffalo fighting. It was captured during the dry season in the Kruger National Park. I was sat at a waterhole, the only waterhole for kilometers around the area, and there were lots of animals around the waterhole, and there was these two male buffalo. They were just hanging around. They weren't doing much, and I thought there's some potential here. So I stuck around for a couple of hours, and the two buffaloes came forward towards the waterhole, and they actually started fighting. The fight only lasted maybe for about 5 seconds, but the scene that I photographed was unbelievable. The whole place was just covered in dust, these two buffalo going at it, and it was slightly backlit by the rising sun. And I captured this image with the buffalo locking horns, the front buffalo. You can see its eye, but you can see it's looking towards the other buffalo, and you can't see the face of the second buffalo. And I think you almost have the perception that that back buffalo has lost because now you can't see his face. He's not part of the story anymore. And I like the dynamic shape of the front buffalo's horns. It's a very diagonal shape, so it's a lot stronger than just a plain horizontal line. And the raw file on this had a very small area not covered in dust, and just cropping that tiny bit of area away made the entire scene covered in dust. And I think it just simplified the scene, and it just helped tell a much stronger story with the whole scene just dust and two buffalo. Now obviously buffaloes are not very colorful, which I really like in this example. You don't need any color in this image. The light and the dust and that very drab color tells a very almost aggressive story in this example.
I think you're quite right. Had you not mentioned that the fight only lasted 5 seconds, you would assume with all of this dust that this has been like a titanic battle between two ginormous beasts. But in my experience, it's very difficult to take interesting photographs of buffalo normally. Buffalo always need something else because, they're very large, angry cows, in my opinion. And then when they do any sort of, activity, it happens very quickly and then they're very docile again. So awesome capture. Did you bring back the color in any way? Because it almost looks like it's almost verging on black and white, isn't it?
The raw file was very drab. I think I added a bit of saturation, maybe with the highlights, just to bring some more of that light in. But in terms of editing this image, this was maybe one of those 5-minute edits. And I think that's, when you get it right in camera, when the scene edits itself, if you want to say that, I think it helps create a very striking image. And there was no color in this image. So I did add a little bit of color, mainly to the highlights. I don't want very strong colors in shadows hardly ever. And I think I maybe slightly desaturated the light in front of the buffalo. And in this example, I definitely added that slight blue color grade to the shadows just to create that very cool, strong light balance in this one.
Where did you learn all your editing skills? Are you self-taught or did you have somebody to teach you right at the beginning?
I'm 100% self-taught. I haven't lived in Hoedspruit my whole life. I used to live in Johannesburg. So I was a good 5-6 hours away from the bush. So I would go to the bush, come home, have maybe a couple of months to work through images, sit late at night and wish I was in the bush, but edit images instead. So I think just through that experimentation, I've learned some neat little tricks here and there. I've also studied a lot of wildlife photography. I actively look at a photograph and say, this is a great image, but why is it great? So it's a lot of experimenting, a lot of actively looking at wildlife photographs and trying to figure out why they work and just trying to replicate that.
So yeah, try to reverse engineer it as well. So what are the most common mistakes that you see? Somebody who's getting into wildlife photography, what are the big mistakes? When you've got a beginner editor, what are you telling them?
I think don't add too much clarity. People love the clarity slider. They love to crank that and it brings in all this contrast and all this texture. And I think that's one thing. I think pumping up the colors too much. I see that often. The other thing is maybe over sharpening and not cleaning up noise. If you are going to sharpen an image, make sure it's not noisy. Obviously, if the image is shot at ISO 100 and there's no noise, go ahead and sharpen. But if you are editing a photograph that's maybe shot at ISO 12,800, clean that noise up first before you sharpen the image. Because if you sharpen that noise, you're just enhancing the effects of that noise and the image is just going to look a lot worse.
And I know you use a lot of Lightroom, but people sometimes bemoan the subscription basis. You've got to pay monthly and then they've got you. Have you found any other systems that are maybe free or paid once-off versions, pay for life versions of anything that you would suggest other than Lightroom, or is Lightroom just killing it?
I mean, for me personally, I teach a lot of stuff in Lightroom. I've got my Lightroom course. So in that sense, I'm sort of dedicated to Lightroom. But there is a lot of other software out there that I haven't tried. There's DxO PhotoLab 9. There's something called Affinity Photo, which I haven't tried, which I think is actually free. I don't know how good it is. To be honest, I've just chosen to master one software and just get on with paying the subscription. For me, I think Lightroom it works. It helps me accomplish what I want to do. And I think sort of from a teaching aspect, most of the people out there are using Lightroom. So for me, it makes sense. But, I do understand that it does cost a lot of money. So there are other things out there that you just pay once for. But the catch there is you still need to pay for an upgrade when it goes from, say, version 5 to version 6. You're not going to receive those upgrades. So for me, it's absolutely worth paying for Lightroom. It's the industry standard. And like I said earlier, it just does everything that I want it to do.
When you edit, do you find that you edit images for different purposes? Will you edit an image differently if you think, well, I'm going to put this on my socials, or this is an image I'm going to edit for competition, for example, or a portfolio or a print? Or is it just you generally do one edit and you'll use it for all those different mediums?
I would say I do one edit. If I am printing the image, I might sharpen it slightly differently or make it a little bit brighter. But 99% of the time, I'm editing an image for how it looks on the screen. I just edit an image until I like it, and I don't think about what it's going to do on Instagram, for example. And I think the other trap I see people fall into is they think, okay, I need to edit this image to go viral. I need it to do well on Instagram, and I think that suffocates your creativity. And I personally don't like doing that. If people don't like my image because it's too dark, well, fair enough, but that's a true representation of what I want to achieve in my photography. And hopefully I can distinguish myself a little bit in a very saturated market through the style and the type of images that I take.
Well, yes, I think eventually authenticity will prevail. So yes, I'm with you on that one. I completely agree. Okay, on that note, let's move on to your fourth image. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is my favorite of the four. And so we've saved the best one, my best till last. So tell the viewers and listeners what's going on in this photograph.
This is a photograph of a zebra taken very close up with a lion scar coming down the one side of it. So there's many reasons why I love this image. First of all, the very dynamic composition. You've got the interacting diagonal lines. You've got the zebra diagonal on this one side, you've got the lion's scar going on this other side. So it's almost two competing forces. And if you think of what this is the battle for life and death. The zebra was obviously attacked by a lion. The lion left the scar, but the zebra had got away. So this image tells a very, very great story. And it's simple. The entire image is taken up with just the zebra's skin. This was taken on a self-drive trip in the Kruger National Park. The zebra was standing on a tar road, and I saw this scar on the zebra, and I immediately got my longer lens out and I isolated exactly the portion that I wanted. And this image is hardly cropped. It's almost full frame. So it's very simple. There's the zebra pattern and there's the claw marks of the lion. And, through that, you can immediately see what story I'm trying to tell with this image. And I've looked for the zebra many times in that area, but I've never found it again.
I'm sure it's still going. I don't know how long ago you took this photograph. If it was 15 years ago, maybe not. But they are incredibly resilient animals. And you will often see quite a lot of zebras with big scratch marks, bite wounds, where they've been taken down, fought back, and survived. They are hardy animals, aren't they?
Yeah, very hardy. This shot was taken, I think, about maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I have tried to look for the zebra again. I'd love to get another image of the same zebra, but getting a glimpse into how harsh life can be and how strong these animals actually are is actually quite eye-opening for people. You know, you might come across a kill or animals fighting or that sort of thing, and people are horrified. But at the end of the day, this is what really happens. And I think for me as a photographer, trying to portray that hardiness of this zebra, for example, is exactly what I want to try and achieve. And my goal with my photography is obviously to enjoy myself and take photos that I want to take, but also try and show people what real Africa is like.
I think, it's very simple, but it's very, very effective in the messaging that comes across. We haven't really talked about your gear. What are you shooting with here? You mentioned that you pulled out a longer lens here. So what is your go-to when you go to the Kruger National Park now? What's in your camera bag?
So this particular image was shot with a Nikon Z6 with a 200 to 500. So for this image, I just zoomed out to 500 millimeters. But now I'm using a Nikon Z8 with a 180 to 600. And I'll tell you a quick story. 2023, I was actually in the Kruger National Park with a 500mm prime, and I had lions hunting zebra straight towards my car. So with a 500mm prime, there's no changing that focal length at all. So I photographed the lions start running, and they ran straight to my car. The lion was on the back of a zebra, maybe 10 meters from my car, and I had 0 images from that trip. And from that day, I vowed never to use a prime lens again, because for me, versatility and capturing the shots is way more important than perhaps that slight improvements that you do get from a prime lens. So that day taught me a real hard lesson. Obviously, not a lot of photographers share the same sort of interpretation of how I think about zoom lenses, but that Nikon 180-600 now, it's really good. With these high resolution cameras, it's not far off a prime lens. Look, don't get me wrong, I'd love a nice big 400 2.8, but I think, in a vehicle and a self-drive, I do a lot of self-drive, and I think having that versatility and also something slightly smaller to use helps me get more shots at the end of the day.
Well, see, that's the thing. You've got to go buy yourself a very expensive lens. And then because you've got a prime lens, you need to go and find yourself a very expensive driver to drive the vehicle for you as well, who can reverse very, very quickly when something's happening. Okay, brilliant. We are going to take another quick break now. And then when we come back, Mark's going to share an image taken by another photographer that he admires. So we'll see you in a second. Welcome back to the final part of this episode of the Pangolin Podcast with my guest today, Mark Dumbleton. We're at the part of the show where we've asked Mark to choose an image taken by another photographer that he admires and maybe he wished he'd taken himself. So Mark, please introduce the image and share with us who took this photograph.
This is an image of a lioness drinking, taken at eye level with a lioness. The image was taken by Greg du Toit, and ever since I've known Greg for a very long time, this image has always stood out to me. And if you've read Greg's book, you know the story behind this image. And I think that's one of the first things that I've sort of connected with. I think he spent about 18 months sitting in this waterhole, waiting to capture photographs of wild lions. And one thing I really like about this image is it's actually taken on film. So this is as authentic as you can get. And I think through digital photography, we've lost a little bit of that authentic nature behind photographs. But this image here is 100% shot on film. And just the dedication that Greg put towards getting this image, and also knowing the backstory, this image for me is one of the most unbelievable images I've ever seen. And I think obviously, to capture something like this nowadays is a lot simpler. You get underground hides with air conditioners and all sorts of crazy things. But the fact that he sat in a waterhole to cover his scent, contracted who knows how many diseases, it's just truly remarkable.
As we record this, in fact, Greg's episode on the Pangolin Podcast will come out just before yours. But if you missed it, I'm going to leave a link in the description so you can go back, because Greg does tell a little story about how he took this photograph and how he almost became lunch. I'll leave it at that. I think you're absolutely right. I think sometimes now it's a little bit too easy. You can sit in a hide. It's got air conditioning. It's got one-way glass. Greg literally sat in a waterhole in Shompoli in Kenya, waiting for these lions to turn up. It's extraordinary. And that's the sort of dedication for you, isn't it? So do you enjoy hide photography? Are there hides near you where you're staying?
They are. I do visit King's Camp quite a bit. They got a nice underground hide there. Again, it's air-conned. It's a nice place to sit, and you can get amazing images. But for me personally, it's more about, I spend a lot of time in the Kruger Park doing self-drive trips, and I think there's a lot you can do self-driving. Obviously, going to a lodge and spending time at these hides, you're going to be way more productive. I do love spending time in hides. I'm one of those guys that will sit there till like almost the whole night if I can. I have serious FOMO and I don't want to miss out on anything if it does come around. So
there's always something coming, isn't there? There's always, just give it 10 more minutes, 3:00 in the morning, just 10 more minutes, something else is going to turn up.
And I especially enjoy the sitting at the hide at night. There's a lot of anticipation. Something might be around the corner. And I think just sitting in that silence, listening to the bush, you might hear a hyena calling or a leopard calling, and it just adds to the atmosphere and to the enjoyment of that.
We see more and more of these images. Obviously, this is what also makes it so unique. This is one of the first times that anyone had ever really got a photograph of a lioness drinking at eye level. But now photography is evolving so fast and people are able to get more and more opportunities like this. It's becoming more and more difficult to take a standout photograph, isn't it?
It definitely is. And I'm reminded of Hannes Lochner's interview. I watched his interview about a month ago and how he conceptualizes photographs. And I think as you become more mature as a photographer, you stop worrying about trying to get the more cliche types of popular shots, and you start thinking outside the box. And that's one thing I'm trying to do with my personal projects is I'm trying to conceptualize photographs that I've never seen. It's going to be incredibly hard, but even if I get one photo, like I'll be happy. And like I said, I was reminded of Hannes Lochner's interview where he conceptualized all these photographs, and he's proof that you can nowadays capture very, very unique images.
Absolutely, because he visualizes, he sketches out the ideas, and then somehow they happen. It's a very, very, very clever skill. If you'd like to keep up to date with Mark's personal project, then we'll leave a link in the description down to his socials. Obviously, please make sure you subscribe to his YouTube channel. Before you subscribe to his YouTube channel, if you haven't subscribed to ours, please do so. And also, please leave us a comment about any of the images that Mark shared today. What are your comments about editing? How do you feel about editing? Maybe you know some software that we don't know about as well. So put it in the comments. Okay, Mark, we've almost reached the end of our time chatting together. But before you go, obviously, we get to ask you the big question. The premise of the show is that you are off to go and live in a humble dwelling to photograph in perpetuity with these images hanging on your wall. But we do let you choose where your humble dwelling is going to be located. So where are you going to be living and photographing for the rest of eternity?
So I would like to have a house on the banks of the Shingwedzi River in northern Kruger. I absolutely love that area. There's incredible trees. The atmosphere in northern Kruger is just something out of this world. And obviously all the big five is there. There's the wildlife is there. I'd love to have a house on the banks there. And I would also love to build my own underground hide that is just for me, that I can do all these crazy things with. And I would be very happy staying there for the rest of my life.
Well, there we go. I mean, we do say it's a humble dwelling, but obviously it's your place, your fantasy. You can have a house with an underground hide. Not quite humble, but there we go. Mark, thank you so much for spending time chatting with us on the Pangolin Podcast. We really appreciate it. Not sure when I'm going to see you. Oh, I know what I might see you in the Toby. You're coming up in May, aren't you, with Villiers, and you're going to come and sit on the houseboat for a few days photographing a bunch of YouTubers on the houseboat. So yeah, make sure you subscribe to everybody's channel because that's going to be fun.
Thank you very much for having me, and we'll see you in Toby next year.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Pangolin Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. As always, we'd love to hear your comments and feedback, so please do leave them below. If you're an audio listener, we'd love it if you could give us a star rating or a quick review too. And if you don't want to miss the next episode or any of our other wildlife photography videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Finally, don't forget to sign up to the Pangolin Photo Safari's Friday Focus newsletter. You can do that by heading over to pangolinphoto.com, or you can scan the QR code on your screen now. I look forward to seeing you on a Pangolin Photo Safari soon, and all that's left for me to say is that the Pangolin Podcast was hosted by me, Toby Jermyn, and produced and edited by Bella Falk. Thank you.